I feel like the last couple of years you've like purposely picked this fight with the red states. I mean, the DeSantis. Yeah, but I don't want to live in the Civil War country.
I agree with that.
You know what?
Well,
but you seem like you purposely want to set up this dichotomy between, oh, this is a blue state and that's a red state.
You got folks out there trying to bring us back to a pre-1960s world. America in reverse, rolling back voting rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, not just access to abortion, but contraception. I mean, it's a profound and consequential moment. And you could sit by and say, well, I really want to get along, as these guys are rolling back the clock.
The governor gave this creepy speech where he was talking about speculators coming in and talking about what to do with the land of all these homes that have been burnt down.
We're dealing with a myriad of issues. I was just talking to Josh Green, the governor down in Hawaii, who had some ideas around some land use concerns he has around speculators coming in, buying up properties.
While it's still only 6% contained, and he did this little dance.
Bill Maher had a fiery exchange with Gavin Newsom on Real Time with Bill Maher. And honestly, I didn't see this coming. Sure, Maher has been pretty critical of the so-called woke warriors and the left lately, but I didn't expect him to put Newsom on the spot like that. Maher masterfully pushed Newsom into a tough position, making him work hard to defend himself, and it turned into quite the showdown. So how did it all unfold, and who came out on top? Keep watching to find out. Here's a clip where you can see just how surprised Maher's audience was at his rapid-fire questioning and Newsom's evasive responses.
You'd be good at the job. Not this year, we know. No, I know. But he said, I don't think he could win. I don't think he could win. He's too progressive coming from this state and what he's done in this state to win in any southern state, any red state. I disagreed, but no, this is a progressive African-American owned station, and I'm sure they like you, but doesn't think you can win. What do you say to that if you could win look at the swing states, there's only 8 of them.
Right. Well, I mean, California's an interesting case study, isn't it? It's the size of 21 state populations combined.
Yeah.
2/3 of the state is very deeply red. We don't need to be lectured on rural politics or border issues. I mean, in so many ways, these are familiar issues, and the issues of the heartland of the United States are very much a part and parcel of the work we're doing in this state. But look, I understand this notion that you're from the coast, you don't understand those things. You can't talk the language. You're not able to communicate, and you're not able to actually encourage and find that common ground.
No, it's stuff like there's a new law in this. I think we have way too many regulations and laws, as we've talked about. And this one, I think, says if you're a department store with over 500 employees, you have to have a gender-neutral toy department.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I get it.
So you think that's silly? You think that's a silly thing that we too much government there?
If you listen closely, you'll hear the audience gasp at this question because honestly, no one expected Maher to put Newsom on the spot over that bizarre state legislation. You can even see the shock on Gavin's face, along with a slight stutter as he scrambles for a response. Maher had him completely trapped, almost like a cat toying with a jittery mouse. Except this particular mouse had a hair gel sponsorship and fewer ways to escape. But like any seasoned politician, Newsom spotted his way out and didn't hesitate. Let's take a listen to his response, and then I'll share my thoughts.
That's an interesting one because the department stores came to us supporting that. And they were the ones making a case for that. They were making a case they're already moving in that direction.
Wanted you to make a law about them?
Well, but they supported the legislation. It wasn't legislation that was enacted, that was initiated from my office, but it was legislation that came up with interesting support from the industry itself. But I understand how that's exploited, and good people can disagree. But that's not something we woke up and said, this is a top priority for the state, when we know what the top priorities are: homelessness, housing, the issues of crime, quality of life, and issues related to regulation and taxes, which are all top of mind. But I get how those things are weaponized.
The question was pretty straightforward. Doesn't Newsom think the government is overstepping by requiring toy stores with more than 500 employees to have a gender-neutral section? But instead of giving a direct answer, because that would be too simple, California's governor takes us on a scenic detour, rambling about how department stores are totally on board with the decision. Sure. Even if that's true, it completely dodges the actual question. Classic Gavin move. This is what happens when left-leaning politicians try to defend their own policies They twist and turn like they're playing a game of political twister, hoping no one picks up on the contradictions. But Maher wasn't about to let him off that easy. Now watch how Bill Maher starts off by flattering Newsom. Pay close attention.
All right, so one, I got you here because I live here and I'm not going anywhere. So I just want to make this a better state like everybody else.
Amen.
And good job this year making it rain.
You're welcome. That was my legislative priority.
Maher started with a bit of flattery, just enough to make Newsom squirm in his seat, like he could sense what was coming. And he was right. That nervous chuckle from the audience? Yeah, they felt it too. They knew their golden boy was about to walk straight into a rhetorical buzzsaw. Newsom, always the smooth-talking politician, was gearing up for his big mic drop moment, except Maher beat him to it. And when the moment landed, it wasn't just a mic drop, it was a full-on wrecking ball. The governor struggled, the audience cringed, and Maher just sat back, watching it all play out.
And we still don't have enough water in the Colorado River and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then whenever I read, 80% of the water goes to agriculture. Almonds. No one ever asked you about almonds? Oh, I'm going to ask you about almonds. We grow a boatload of almonds
I'm well
here.
aware.
You know how much water it takes?
Many gallons.
1,900 gallons to grow a pound of almonds. Yeah. Come on, man. Take on big almond.
Take on big almonds.
I mean, it's not like we don't have the water.
Another sharp question from Maher. For years, California officials have been sounding the alarm about water shortages, claiming the state's rivers just couldn't keep up. But surprise, surprise, investigations revealed there's actually plenty of water. The catch? A whopping 80% of it is being drained by, of all things, almonds. Yep, almonds. Which, fun fact, use as much water as all indoor household consumption combined. And to make matters worse, they only contribute a tiny 2% to California's economy. So Maher's question was straightforward. What is Newsom's office actually doing about this water crisis? Now watch as Newsom dodges the question like he's trying out for Dancing with the Stars.
In those extreme years with these atmospheric rivers, wets are getting a lot wetter, dries drier, hot's getting a lot hotter. And so we've got to modernize our conveyance system. We've got to modernize our storage, not just above ground, but below ground. And so that's a big part of our focus and frame, including desalinization plants. We have 20 projects just on desal that we're working on today. So we put out a detailed water strategy that includes, by the way, getting that Delta Conveyance project back up and operational, and includes the first above ground off stream storage facility in half a century in the state, which, by the way, is being aided by a regulatory package I pushed forward to reduce red tape in the state of California and address the permitting quagmires that you rightfully pointed out.
Did you catch all that word salad? Because I sure did. The question was simple. What was Newsom actually going to do about the almond industry draining California's water? But true to form, he pulled the classic left-wing sidestep, ignoring the elephant, or should I say almond, in the room, and instead going on about his so-called noble efforts to store rainwater and other vague water management plans. The real issue isn't that California lacks water, it's that almost all of it is being funneled into growing almonds, which barely make a dent in the state's economy at just 2%. But rather than tackling that uncomfortable fact, Newsom danced around the question and clung to the same worn-out talking points about improving water storage. And that, my friends, is a textbook example of performative politics. Don't solve the problem, just wrap it in buzzwords and hope no one notices.
Comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens right now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow. Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's, and I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that was their first new media.
It is new media because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
The push for woke ideology is in full swing, but one person isn't afraid to hit the brakes and call out the nonsense. Bill Maher, the liberal comedian known for holding his own side accountable, just took apart an MSNBC host who jumped on the anti-Trump bandwagon. So what exactly did the host say that set this off, and how did Maher's sharp response leave them stunned? Here's everything you need to know.
Ken Martin.
Yep.
I was not aware of who he was before. I did not think it got off to a great start because I think they need to completely reroute themselves, and I don't think they did it. What do you think?
Let's take a moment to really focus on the question and how Chris Hayes responds. The question was simple. Maher wanted to know how the Democrats plan to regroup after their election losses to Donald Trump. Now, pay attention to Hayes' answer.
I think there's sort of two different imperatives that are in a little bit of tension with each other. So one, I think there's an imperative right now for the party to stand up against the most destructive things that Musk and Trump are doing. And I think they're doing some genuinely destructive things. I mean, there's people walking around the world right now with like devices inside their bodies from clinical trials sponsored by USAID that they can't get out. The guards that were guarding ISIS prisoners in Syria were paid on USAID salaries that got cut off. There's a 25-year-old mucking around the code base of the Treasury system. So there's things they have to do to try to oppose. But it's also the case that like all of the reflection that happened after losing that election and trying to figure about how do you win back people you lost was real and true. And I guess my feeling is you gotta fight, you gotta try different things, and you have to be authentic. You can't like reverse engineer any of this off a blueprint. And I really think this is true about politics. Steve Jobs once said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. Like, it's our job. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Barack Obama off of George W. Bush. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Donald Trump off of Barack Obama. What happens in the end of an election is everyone sifts through the data and they come up with their perfect, their plan based on, well, this worked and with this group and we got attack here and there. And what politics about is a certain point is like innovation and communication. You got to come up with new stories.
According to Hayes, it's not up to the customer to decide what they want, and it's not up to the voters to choose who they want either. Instead, that decision has to be made for them. In the Democrats' world, they believe they alone have the right to decide what voters should want. Sounds pretty ridiculous, right? Now, just wait for Bill Maher's response.
Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
Bill Maher shut Chris Hayes down with one sharp sentence. People didn't like the message. End of story. While Hayes went on and on about reverse engineering political strategies and balancing multiple election battles, Maher got straight to the point. The answer wasn't buried under political jargon or complicated theories. It was simple. Give people what they actually want. Hayes' long-winded explanation only made it clearer just how out of touch the Democratic Party is with the average voter. Instead of addressing why their message didn't land, he sidestepped the real issue. But Maher wasn't buying it. He pointed out that the problem wasn't about campaign strategy or how things were presented. It was about substance. Voters heard the Democrats loud and clear. They just didn't like what they were selling. That's the uncomfortable truth the left keeps ignoring. It's not about tweaking the message, it's about changing what's being offered. If your message doesn't connect, no amount of political spin will fix it. And until Democrats come to terms with that, they'll keep losing ground. If you thought that was bad, just wait for Hayes' next comment.
I think that I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a moment across the political spectrum of some form of progressive communication that's either left them bewildered or a little like, I don't know about that. But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call like common sense, patriotic pluralism. Yeah. That is a majority message, which is like, if some father and mother have healthcare for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the out of their business. Let them make that decision. That's their decision to make. And you don't have to make that for your family.
You have to appreciate how the left's woke crowd loves to blur the lines. Here, Chris Hayes claims that if parents have arranged gender-affirming care for their kids, they should be free to move forward with the transition, and that no one else should have a say in it. But that's not the real debate, and it's certainly not what the left has been pushing. Bill Maher doesn't hesitate to step in and set the record straight.
Well, I mean, but the argument is whether the child should make the decision.
But the child is never making the decision. The parents are always making the decision. Parents consent to medical care.
Well, here in California, you're allowed to hide it from the parents if the kid is.
Yes.
Thank you, one person who knows that.
But I mean,
somebody knows that.
What the left was actually pushing wasn't just about parental choice or supporting kids. It was about giving schools the power to decide whether a child could keep their transition process a secret from their own parents. In other words, kids could make life-changing decisions while the very people responsible for their well-being were completely left out. Schools would act as gatekeepers. Just think about that for a second. Parents who are both legally and morally responsible for their children could be entirely shut out of critical decisions about their child's health and identity. Is it just me, or does it seem like the left is already trying to distance itself from its own message just months after the election? Honestly, who could blame them? If my stance was that bizarre, disconnected, and borderline dystopian, I'd be running from it too. This isn't just about politics. It's about common sense, parental rights, and protecting families. The idea that bureaucrats and school officials somehow know better than a child's own parents isn't just absurd, it's dangerous. It's government overreach that most Americans simply won't accept. And deep down, the left knows it. That's why they're backpedaling, toning things down, and pretending this was never their position in the first place. Because when these extreme policies are put under a spotlight, even they realize just how out of touch and impossible to defend they really are. And that's exactly why so many voters walked away from the Democratic Party. Not because they didn't have a message, but because their message was completely detached from reality. Of course, legacy media played its part in pushing all of this. That's why independent media took center stage during Trump's re-election. And when Bill Maher confronted a left-wing guest with this reality, her response said it all.
What do you think of the Trump White House admitting more influencers and podcasters into the press corps? Yeah, the press room is different. I mean, it reflects America.
I think it's great.
Yeah, you do.
But it's mostly right-wing influencers and podcasters, obviously, but I think it's a good step. I mean, this is how people are getting their news.
It is. I mean, how can you deny it?
I was actually over there the other day, and it's packed in there. And I think even all the reporters, whether you're Legacy or the podcasting people, they're all happy. And then they have like the one rotating chair, which I guess is pretty cool. So there's always like somebody new that comes in.
So this is you're at the White House, you're talking about?
Yeah.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that that was their first new media.
It is new media, because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's what Bezos bought the Washington Post for. He bought it for like $1, didn't he? So, you know.